Welcome to Women in B2B Marketing, a show where CMOs, VPs of marketing, and all strong women leaders in B2B discuss their top tactics, strategies, and tips for building high-performing teams, leveraging trends, and ultimately rocking their marketing careers. Made by and for women, insightful for all. I'm your host and 15-year B2B marketer, Jane Serra. Let's dive in. Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Women in B2B Marketing. Today, we are going to chat all things AI and marketing specifically with Alessandra Colaci, who is an AI consultant and trainer. She's founder of Humans Plus AI. And guys, her background is so impressive. When you look at her LinkedIn, which I highly recommend you do and connect with her, it's B2C, B2B. She's done social marketing, product marketing, demand and growth marketing across B2C and B2B, and now the world of AI. So I'm so excited to pick your brain, Alessandra, across all of this. And welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to get into this.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack here. I always love to start with just hearing a little bit about my guest's path into where you are today. So for you, if you could walk us through from the beginning, B2C to B2B, and how you saw yourselves in all different aspects of marketing and what led you currently to focusing on AI for marketing.
Yeah, I had a very unconventional path and obviously gone through like the full gamut. I consider myself like a generalist. So that kind of works out because a lot of times I've had to wear the hats of starting a team and growing a team. So that's like how my initial experience started. I started in e-commerce actually. And so that was like my first experience was at Lulu's,
Cool.
which was how I got into B2C and really loved that because I think it was like the early days of like social media. It was the early days of blogging and influencer marketing. And back then it was like Facebook and Instagram were a little bit more like newer. And so it's something that I was able to really form a lot of those early things that now are just commonplace, but really back then it was not. And I think that was really cool to pioneer that kind of stuff. And so that really led me to like social media being a very strong part of my early career and doing that across a number of roles. But then after that, I got into kind of the path led me to a little bit more of SaaS with an e-commerce slant. We had e-commerce sellers that we would work with, but it was like on the SaaS side for eBay sellers. And that was really cool because I got to come into a company that was already very mature and they didn't have a marketing organization. They didn't have any really function for marketing. And so I like within a short amount of time was managing, I think like some huge percentage of the org across like data analytics, like the sales team. I got to manage the sales team, got to manage the marketing team, the content team, media, all that kind of stuff, PR. I really jumped in very early in my career into all the things. And I'm so happy I got to manage a sales team too, because I got to like very quickly see that side of things too, versus like later in my career. And so that was a full gamut. And then so like after that, pretty much since then have been mostly in SaaS, mostly tech companies, startups that are Series A or B funding, and like some of them bootstrapped. And generally speaking, my kind of MO is coming in very early and being like the first marketing hire or like one of the earlier marketing hires and then scaling a team out. I like to really have my hands on everything and then be able to be like, okay, this is a function that we need someone specifically for, and then hiring with each area. But that's been very consistent across most of my roles throughout my career.
Yeah. So now from scaling teams of people out, you're getting into this AI space and scaling that usage across teams. What got you into this world of AI and consulting on that side?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was at a place called Mailshake, which is also a SaaS company, and we were one of the early companies that actually applied for access for OpenAI's API. And as we all know, ChatGPT since then has boomed, but that was like the very early days. That was before ChatGPT. OpenAI had an API and they had built out this like AI model, and we were building on that. And so we were creating like a micro tool basically of using AI through their API. And it was so interesting because I got to help train the model and really like fine tune it, refine it. And I found that super fascinating, but also being on the ground floor of this, that is now table stakes. So within that, I was able to really look at also my background is pretty strong in product marketing And so I would test messaging and I would look at how that all worked out. I was like, oh, it's like a whole different thing for AI. This is so new that we have to speak to them differently. We have to figure out what this product strategy is even going to be for AI versus non AI. And so that was like really fascinating to me. But then also I started to get into like Mid-Journey and like the whole image generation side of it. And that was like so cool because it was the early days of Mid-Journey where it was still a little bit, it wasn't realistic. You can be like, oh, that's a stock photo. But it was so cool because anything I could imagine, I could generate. And then as a marketer, I really was like, that's powerful. At some point, I'm going to be able to just create images however I want. Now, and then now getting to the place where we can do that kind of end-to-end process and really be like really strong in the things that I think were taking a lot of time. That's how I got into the consulting side is I think a lot of times we're just spinning our wheels doing things that are really not necessarily human needs, not necessarily human needs to be doing those things, but then it frees us up for the things that humans should be doing. And that's why the company is named Humans Plus AI, because I think it's like very additive. It's, hey, how do we figure that out where people can free up time for the monotonous stuff we all do in our jobs that we're like, okay, yeah, we just want to get to the good work. And then I think that's why I've become so passionate about AI in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah. Oh, so cool that you got early access into playing with it and getting your hands on it.
Yeah.
I wonder, knowing and testing this out for several years now, whereas most of us are just getting into it or a year into it. So we're still all fairly new. Where would you say, if someone's just starting or hasn't gotten into the world of AI yet, any listeners, where's the best place for those of us in B2B marketing to begin with AI?
Yeah, I think my whole thing is start with whatever tools you have access to already. Generally speaking, that's ChatGPT. I think it's one of those things where I've always been an experimenter kind of a mentality. And I always teach my teams to be experimenters and really just play and try things and see what's working. And I think it's very similar with ChatGPT. You know, a lot of times people just treat it as this out of the box thing, but it's good to start there and say, okay, let me try this way and that way and see which way gets my best result. And then this is a template I can keep on using. So I think starting there, but also understanding that, and I'll probably say this a few times in this episode, but AI is not a mind reader. It can be pretty magical, but it's not going to actually understand your role, your audience, your background, any kind of information you have about your audience. And people treat it like that, though. They're just like, oh, I asked ChatGPT something and it was so terrible. And I'm like, yeah, but then just I'll send them like a slight tweak to it and then it'll be like much more effective. So I think always provide that foundational information in the same way you would if you were like creating an ad campaign or you were using existing tools. It's out of the box is not going to have all that. So I think that's my number one kind of piece of advice is give it that context. And also it's a good opportunity to think deeply about those things because a lot of companies don't ever think about who is our audience and what kind of audience do we have and which different personas and all that kind of stuff. This is a good reset where people can take a step back and say, okay, let's have some prompts that are for each specific audience or that are snippets that we can use for different things so that you can give some context to something like ChatGPT for a lot of that stuff and get better output from it.
Yeah. So much of it does seem to come down to the art of the prompt, art and science of the prompt. I wonder, as you're encouraging your team or empowering your team to experiment with ChatGPT or AI, are there any guardrails we should have in place? For instance, this is top of mind for me. I assume for some others as well, is when to have a private LLM and when to just use ChatGPT, or maybe there is a way to have it private within ChatGPT. Just, are there any guardrails with what your team can and should or should not put inside one of these systems?
Yeah, I think, when unless it's like a really large enterprise that has very proprietary data, I think what people don't understand is that I believe it was last year, May or so of last year, there was a shift where ChatGPT doesn't actually use data to train internal models. If you're posting something, it's actually very private to you. It's not used to train it. I honestly they don't really find a use of using it to train the model because it is very specific to a company, for example. So it's not going to necessarily help the model get better anyway. But they like very quietly made that announcement. It wasn't something that I saw really like anywhere. And then as I was, because I'm always just update to date with things, I found a blog post where they're like, hey, it's not training models anymore. However, I think some companies are like very like, we just want to make sure that everything's really closed off and it's siloed. And in those cases, I think when you're a certain enterprise size, companies like ours can actually build out like a private LLM, especially newer tools like Google Gemini, some of the Amazon tools. There's a lot of things that Microsoft tools as well. A lot of those have models that are a little bit more built for that. But even within OpenAI, there's like a team account that you can create that is a little bit more of this is licenses basically for your team. So that's something that I think people could do. But I'd say 80 to 90% of the use cases, it's going to be fine for you just to use that. If you're, especially because most of the time it's not like customer data or any of that kind of stuff. If you're putting a lot of customer data in, then you may want to build a private LLM. But I think people, because it used to be something that was a factor, are like still very worried about it. I don't think people have to be as worried anymore, like at this point.
That's really good to know. I think I'm still in that camp. I didn't get the memo that it's not used to train anymore. Because I think there's fear, right? I understand with huge companies and they have to go through compliance and make sure it's approved in certain ways. I wonder if for smaller or even mid-sized companies, I'm just curious where the line is that you don't cross. Because we can obviously put in for help guiding outlines for content creation and fleshing things out and creating our prompts just to get it better and better, our content. If you're analyzing a bunch of customer interviews, right, and you put that into the system, is that safe to put in there? Do you want to anonymize the name of the person and the company if you wanted to organize into sheet or a chart of some kind? Like, where do you draw the line of what is safe and private versus really shouldn't be doing this in ChatGPT?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, in general, even if it wasn't ChatGPT, I think it's like one of those things that best practices are probably just to create, so like, for example, I was analyzing some survey data and I just basically removed the column with their names, or I removed the column with their emails, because it's not helpful for the data anyway, right? It's not like it's going to say, oh, okay, this is the person XYZ. Or you can use like a customer ID or things like that, which are much safer because those are usually like hashed and they're not something that is like related to their identity. You also have to think that most of the time those things are not going to really like help unless you're doing like some really deep analysis across like these customers and why do they churn and that kind of stuff. And I think in that case, yes, putting just like a number for each customer is a helpful way of doing that, because that way you can anonymize it more. Even if you are doing that, I don't think it's a problem to use something like ChatGPT, but I do think it's not so much the security and the privacy, it's more a matter of the customization and the creating a tool that's really built for your company. And for example, I was working with an e-commerce company that they want to build more of a process that's very specific for like the companies that they work with. It's more of an agency model. And if you did that, it would take a lot of work for you to like basically give context to the chat and then do that every time or have a history of that. Whereas if you did like a custom built API tool on OpenAI, then you could actually say, hey, we built the interface the way we want it. We actually give it all this data, a lot more data than we could if we were just like creating a prompt, because you can give it a lot more background. There's more capacity in what data you use and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's the question people need to ask themselves. What's a good enough first step? But then how do we build custom micro tools that are internal or external for us to use on? I personally find OpenAI is the easiest one to roll out, but Gemini has them, really any of these other platforms do too. And especially with custom GPTs, which are very easy to build, then you can say, okay, let's really give it this context and this data that's always it's a permanent memory for this instance of a custom GPT. And you build those with just, you can say, okay, this chatbot is creating blog ideas or things like that. And you can give it context, but also you can give it a backstory of who your audience is and all that kind of stuff. So that's the easiest. And then the final layer would be like a custom built on the API. But I think most situations would be either out of the box or a custom GPT, which is very easy to build. And then they really need it would be like a custom solution to be built out.
So cool. The layers there that you just explained. So out of the box, most of us are starting with now the custom GPT. And then third is like building out an entire custom solution.
Yeah. And those, I think too, especially when you think of, do we want our team to have an interface that is very specific. When you think of that, it's like a little software internally that the team is using, or you can even build them into like Slack bots and things like that. So I think, when you ask yourself, like, what is our team doing? Is using just off the shelf, or is using a custom GPT going to take more time for our team and they're going to have to like work around it or have a certain workflow, versus if we have a specific interface with these buttons and this like process and like a different kind of things that go through it. I think the time savings generally at some point is worth doing something custom. You can get a decent percent there for those first two options.
Do you find that customers come to you or new prospects come to you asking or knowing exactly what they want? Like, we really want to build XYZ. Can you help us? Or do they come to you saying, we want to leverage AI to be more efficient, but we don't know where to start? Which do you experience more?
Yeah, it's been funny because the last few months we're very new consultancy, but I think just even getting clients, the difficulty has been that they don't have to know anything really. They just need to know. I think of it as them coming to us and saying, these are the problems we want to solve, or these are the goals that we have.
Yeah.
But people feel like they already have to have the answers. And that's the opposite of what my goal is. I think a lot of times, even if you're working on internal AI initiatives and you get a lot of pressure from the CEO or the CMO or whoever, we just need to use AI. I still think there's that foundational thing that a lot of people think they have to understand all the tech already, or they have to like know exactly which tools. And let's take a step back and actually just say, what are our goals this quarter? What kind of operations does our team spend a lot of time in? Because a lot of times that's the thing is I come from very much the creative side of AI too. So as I started really with like Midjourney and all that stuff. And then I realized so much of it is operations. Like, it's okay if your marketing team is spending a lot of time creating content and there's a specific part of the process that can be somewhat automated or at least improved, then that's the question that should be asked. And then I think that's my goal, is to create a roadmap for people and really just say, okay, here's the AI roadmap and it's over the next few months. But there's usually some low-hanging fruit that you can start with and then build into that. But I think like anything, it's new technology and a lot of people feel like they have to like know it all. But I keep on comparing it to like, remember when HubSpot first came out or when CRMs first became a thing?
Yeah.
We didn't know anything. We were just like, okay, this is cool. But we were like, okay, what is this going to solve for us? And before we bought that tech or before we implemented that tech, we were like, okay, this is what it's going to help with. So I think it's the same thing. It's just being strategic about it.
Yeah. It's so interesting because you're right. Do we even say marketing automation platform anymore for HubSpot? I don't even think we use that term anymore. But it's funny, AI is very similar. It's just more broad because it can be for anybody.
Yeah. And I think that's also why people think, oh, this is just a fad, or this is just something that's going to be a flash in the pan, because they think of it like that, like just this like little cool whirligig that we're using. And really it's like a fundamental thing. And I think that's why I'm so bullish on it, is because obviously I have a vested interest, but I think I've been bullish from the beginning. And why I focused on this is because it feels like a culmination of all of those different things that we've, had in these different phases of tech and the web and all that kind of stuff. And this is the outcome where it's okay. Now, if we're really strategic about this, will not replace those things, but it will help augment them and make them better, or help make our process better. And I think we've gotten to the place where all this tech has basically made us like busier and more like just on the hamster wheel all the time. And hopefully this will do the opposite, where it's okay, now let's focus. So I think even me as a marketing leader or people I work with, a lot of times you're just like so busy doing that stuff, right? But you don't have time to do the truly like strategic work or the customer interviews or the things that you don't get to. And so I think a lot of this will hopefully solve that, where it's, okay, now we have time to do that. That should be done by a person. These other things should be done by an AI.
Yes. Do you see, this is my very high level, not in the nitty gritty of AI take on AI, is that it's pushing us more towards focusing on the relationship side of things that you can't leverage AI for, and building those deep relationships with your prospects, your peers, your colleagues, your partners, all aspects around your brand and you, even personally, career-wise, and your company. And then everything that's slowly but surely, every other aspect is you're going to at least find ways to automate, and then the human strategy combined with it, humans plus AI, but that combination. But it seems to be pushing us more towards the relationship so AI can handle a lot of the automatable components.
Yeah. And I think a lot of us just feel really burnt out at this point, honestly. Like I joke, like I used to have a podcast called Marketing is Hard and Everyone's Just Guessing. And so it was just because it just felt, okay, we're doing the same things over and over and it's very like repetitive and all that kind of stuff. And I think across a lot of different departments, people are just burnt out because it becomes like a very routine. Oh, this is what we always do. And this is what we've always done. And this is maybe an opportunity for us to just be like, okay, we can break the mold and we can have people with what's important. But even like when I was managing, I've managed a lot of content teams and all that kind of stuff. And even let's say AI wasn't a factor. At that point, I would always talk to my teams about, hey, we're writing a blog post, but let's have like the human element. Let's like interview the CEO or the founder and have some stuff that's really perspectives that are unique. And I think it's the same thing with this. It's like, how do we humanize it? We should have always been doing that, I think, even before AI became a thing. But now it's going to be really important to add in those little nuggets of things that are thoughts and personalities and all that kind of stuff as a part of that. And I think it's also a time where founders and CEOs, even at large enterprises, should become more visible and more like vocal and more spreading whatever is important to them in terms of the messaging and all that kind of stuff. And so I think will be a time where people are looking for more of that because we know that people are doing that. Like, how do you add the human element? How do you add that aspect of it? Video, interviews, those kind of things. I think it's one of those things where we need to think more about that now because it's so scalable for people to do it the wrong way, I think, then it's like there's a right way of doing it.
Yeah, so true. Can you walk us through a few examples or areas where, as marketers listening, that we can start leveraging AI? There's the content creation. I think if there's anything specific you want to cover there, go for it. But I think the content piece is the one area that's easy to grasp for us marketers. But anything besides content or in different areas like demand gen or product or any other side that you just think is low hanging fruit, or you can walk us through a couple of examples.
Yeah, I think obviously I kind of default to the product marketing side just because I think I have a background in that, but also I feel like that's a foundational piece that a lot of times companies don't get to, right? They're just like, we'll eventually get to it, or we don't have a specialist for that, or our marketing team is
it's the last hire for some reason.
Yeah, it totally is. Yeah, it's funny because I feel like video and product marketing are like always like on the checklist and they just don't get to that. And so I think for me, I've always been fascinated because when I have worked either myself or been leading product marketing, it's something that has made such an impact. And so like you were saying, content, it's somewhat of an expected use case and we understand that. But also to make content better, we have to understand our customers better. We have to understand our audience, our personas, all that kind of stuff, our messaging and everything, so that we can feed that to the AI, to tools to be able to say, okay, this is better content. This is more on target. This is more what they would want to learn about, that kind of thing. So even if you're coming up with ideas and things like that, the more you can understand that, the better of a foundation that is, right? So I think it's like a pre-step kind of thing. So I think like analyzing customer calls obviously is a really important one. The marketing team's like biggest asset is looking at the sales team and saying they are usually the front line of just having those conversations, whether they're people who became customers or people who did not become customers, analyzing what is the difference between the people who did become customers and the people who didn't. And so that could be call recordings, that could be like data about their industries, their titles, those kind of things. But I think the strongest and most underused part of AI is in analysis like that, because when it's hard for people to understand, but before previous quote unquote AI or like data analysis and text analysis was not able to understand context. So if you like put some data in for a customer survey, it would be like, oh, there's a lot of the word the or a, or it would just know. Like, there's a lot of, and so that's not super helpful because you'd be like, oh, people said what a certain words a lot, but that's not a lot of context. But even small surveys that I put into ChatGPT and said, okay, this is what this data is, or I've been like, what do you think this data is about? Which is also an interesting way to prime it and see what it's understanding about that. But then you say, yeah, this is what this is about. It's a customer survey about XYZ. And here's the fields that are in here, or usually if the fields are labeled correctly, it can understand that context. And then it's able to really very clearly understand, okay, now tell me about this persona within that, or these people who answered that are in this industry, or these people who answered that are within these roles. And it can give like a high level summary and a detailed summary of exactly what their pain points were, what they liked, what they didn't like, which is something that's very unique and new to AI, because that would be a person basically looking through before and saying, how do I understand these hundreds of responses or even dozens of responses and understand like what the open fields are in this? Open fields and surveys and customer data and call recordings, all that kind of thing are the most powerful thing, because you're not just like giving them a checkbox and they're like, I don't know, I have to be in one of these. But it can give you the words that they're using. It can give you the kind of things that they're struggling with. It can give you the foundational kind of jobs to be done and the things that are really foundational to understanding our customers. I love that part of it because I think it helps even if you don't have a product marketer or a customer marketing person or a life cycle marketer person. That's something that can still help, like a content team, an SEO team, any kind of marketing manager, to be able to do that analysis and not have to be like taking a lot of time to do it.
This is beautiful. So I have a few different thoughts from data analysis side of things. 3 different things in my head. Let's see if I remember them all and tell me where I'm wrong, if I'm wrong, or what I'm missing. Just 3 examples of how we can leverage it for data analysis on the marketing side, product marketing. So number 1, if we take CRM data, remove names and emails, and we have, if they became a customer or did not become a customer, we can take that data in a sheet of some kind, CSV, upload that, and ask for insight on why or what the trends are in those that did close one versus those that we lost. Is that one that we can do? Okay.
Yeah,
anything
exactly.
that when we do something like that, what information is key to make sure we upload to get that proper analysis?
I think usually if you have the default fields of their industry, their title, that kind of thing, maybe like seniority level, just to give some context and those kind of things. I think those are the general things that you want to ask about, or like company size is another thing that I really like to have. And a lot of times too, people are like, I don't have that data already, but it's so important to that I think uploading that to like Apollo or something like that to just enrich the data that you have. Because especially if you have people who did not become customers, you might not have that intake survey or the onboarding survey to have like more information. But it's so crucial. And there's a lot of cost effective ways to enrich your data that I think then you can just have that exploration moment where you're like, okay, now I'm just like asking questions and having a conversation basically with ChatGPT about this data. And it's fascinating because you're like, oh, interesting. This is something that they said if they were like a marketing manager versus if they're like a sales manager. Or this is something that we saw that like more people converted if they were like in this role or this industry or this company size. And so I think that gives you a lot of really good information to then just explore it more and have a literal conversation with it about that. But I think those are like the basics. And then next level, obviously, if you have demo recordings that you can attach to that and have within that, that could be something that you have as well, because it's something that they have so much of their own words that they're using within something like that. High level is still, you see the trends. Oh, we should really go after CMOs or sales leaders or whatever that looks like when you start to see
or this tech stack, right?
Exactly. Tech stack.
If you have that intel.
Absolutely. That's another good one, because you're like, oh, like they're using this tool or they switched from this tool to us or whatever. Or the ones that we lost were actually more this persona or this kind of thing, you know? So I think that gives a lot of like, especially for marketing effort and dollars, you're like, hey, let's stop marketing to XYZ, focus more on this. But I also think like when you upload demo call recordings and things like that, because for me as a marketer, I'm like, just because it's not working doesn't mean it doesn't work. It means that we're not doing something right. So you may have a trend that you see, and then it's like, oh, for the lost data, for the ones that didn't convert, it was XYZ. It doesn't necessarily mean that's the wrong persona. It might mean that they have some disappointment and you are like, what things did they not, what things were missing, what kind of things were problems and pain points they had that the people who we want as customers didn't. Because a lot of times like the largest market are the laggards and not necessarily the early adopters, but they're the biggest market. So that's one of the things, if we can solve for what is missing in the product or what is missing in the sales process, the marketing process, whatever, the content, any of that stuff. I personally think that's the gold, right? That's the one that you could really be like, okay, like how do we address this and get that information versus us going through that manually would take forever.
Yes. I see myself rabbit holing with this tonight. I'm very excited. But so I have
it's really fun.
number one.
Like, yeah.
It is. Yeah. There's just so much here. So to make sure I have this, so number one, high level CRM data, we can import that, anonymize it to a degree, and then pull in insights and trends, like what tools are they using for those won versus those lost, their tech stack, the company size, information like that to identify trends faster than our human eye and analysis can do it. Second, a deeper step, there's two more that are the next level up from here. Customer surveys or interviews, right? Where you're trying to extract what terms they use, their messaging, their pain points, all of that in just aggregate and collect those trends. But then third, prospects, what you're saying, like demo call recordings. So for closed lost versus closed won, is there a limit to what you can upload or how many files you can upload? Because I'm trying to picture logistics of what you'd be uploading into ChatGPT, for instance, call recording wise. Is it like the whole month of what was closed lost and closed won, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where most people probably wouldn't run into the limit. Like the new ChatGPT Omni is a little bit higher of a limit. They're even having like more stuff available for the free plan and stuff like that. But the like by far largest limit, and it's very hard to like even understand what it is because it's tokens, which are like super complicated of like how that's calculated and all that kind of stuff. So let's say you uploaded like a 2-hour YouTube video, like that's going to be a lot of tokens and that you probably would run into a limit on ChatGPT. But if you have just maybe you take only certain demos or you like sample the data or something like that, then you probably won't run into that. So I think it's one of those things where also I think just if you have to pare it down to here's like X number of these customers, X number of these call recordings that we do. It's more so usually has to be another tool that will transcribe it. That way you can just have it in a spreadsheet or something like that.
Yes.
For some of these tools, you can upload it directly like Gemini and I believe ChatGPT as well, but it's like a little bit more intensive on basically the token limit. Versus if you're uploading that, it probably would be a little bit easier for it to process that. But Gemini, so Google Gemini now has a new version and it's like vastly bigger in terms of its capacity. If you're like uploading a bunch of like customer data and backstory and history of like your audience and all that kind of stuff, like that's probably a better bet. However, I think most of the time within ChatGPT, you won't hit the limit. And if you do just like sample basically take like half of them or whatever, however much it is, and then see if that works. And then you can break it up into a couple of different things. But I think a lot of times if we are hitting that limit, we already have enough data in the sampling that it's enough to get some good insights from. Or we just pick like kind of subsets of it. Maybe we want to analyze like a specific job title within like closed won or closed lost or things like that. And you can break it down like that.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So maybe simply transcripts over video to save on tokens and size overall. And putting that into perhaps a single spreadsheet these are the closed lost, these are the closed won, and links to each transcript or putting the transcript in the actual sheet that you're uploading.
I'm usually because then you can have basically the whole record. And so you can have like your CRM data and then you can have a field that is for a transcript. That's something that you can do.
Oh, wow. In one cell?
Yeah, it could be in a cell. It's one of those things where it sounds crazy, but it's definitely something where then it would treat it as that's a line. And I think it depends. Some people have very long demos. Some people have very short ones. But
I'm picturing like an hour-long transcript put into one cell.
Exactly. And I think if you have like particularly long, if they're like hour-long demos or things like that, then I think you probably would have to sample and just say, let's take like, and also some people have a ton of demos and some people have a handful of demos. So I think depending on that, you might want to just do a week at a time or something like that, just to sample that. But I usually, there's enough meat in it, even if you are doing a subset of that you can find some pretty good insights. There's sometimes even want to be like, hey, let me take a sample of them from a seasonal kind of time and then a non-seasonal time, because a lot of us have those trends where it's very different depending on the time of year or like the kind of audience. But also that you may want to analyze, hey, here's this, and you upload that, and then you say, here's this other one from the next year. What has changed between these two? So even if you're doing without the transcripts, but you're just saying what has changed between the audience, like people who are becoming customers like last year versus this year, that's a lot easier to just do with CRM data because it's a smaller sample of the data. But that's something that is really powerful, because then you can see, oh, like we're getting more of this kind of persona or this kind of person this year versus last, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, this is fascinating. I love the idea of using this for analysis, and I haven't dived into that yet, but I definitely plan to. So this is just really cool to see specific examples. On the same vein, I'm curious, are there any other specific tools that you recommend or that are top of mind for you right now? It could be the big ones that you've mentioned a few of already, but are there any other side tools like Midjourney that have taken it and created their own thing? Any other tools that are top of mind or fun for you right now?
Yeah, I think in terms of image creation, of course, Midjourney is stronger than I think people know, because it's just, I'm in there constantly. And basically every day I'm playing in there, and it can create whatever you want and it can be very real. I use another tool that's what's called an upscaler called Magnific. Magnific, if you get something out of Dolly or Midjourney or any of these image creation tools that's not quite high fidelity and looking like completely real, Magnific's amazing. It's literally magical, where you can put something in and it makes it look perfect down to the freckles on someone's face and all that kind of stuff, like wrinkles, everything. So it'll make it super realistic. And so it is for upscaling, but it actually, you can change different settings on the side to make it look more realistic or add details and things like that. And then I'd say the one that I talk about a lot, just because I think there's some apprehension sometimes with ChatGPT in terms of like statistics and that kind of a thing, and metrics or whatever that you're pulling, which is, of course, with content, it's a very common thing that we're like, hey, give me statistics about XYZ. So perplexity.ai is fantastic because it like shows the work, right? And ChatGPT is starting to do that, where it'll say, here's the links and that kind of stuff. But with Perplexity, it actually has like image references if you're like, there's other related stuff, or it'll have like follow-up questions. I don't think ChatGPT is pretty strong. It won't suggest follow-up questions, but with Perplexity, it'll actually suggest other questions that are related. So it's more like a search engine, but it also will always have links to the references. And so really good for research, really good for data or for metrics and things like that you're trying to find for stats. I love Perplexity. It's really powerful.
Cool. I've heard it a couple times referenced recently, so I definitely need to check it out. That's great that it's more reliable for data and it gives references. So that's huge. Are there any, not really tools, but any flags or things to know as everybody gets deeper and deeper into testing out and experimenting with AI to be aware of on, there's the ethics front and DE&I issues where things like that. Is there anything to keep in mind and just be aware of in regards to bias and any other AI issues?
Yeah, I think it's come a long way. It's funny because like Google, I think was over indexed in some of that stuff, where they were saying like they would ask for historical things and it would be like very diverse when it wasn't something that was. And so I think that's a good one to just make sure that, okay, that's something that's including. And then I think Midjourney, for example, includes a lot of diversity in the images generated, which is really good, because I think it's something I don't have to like worry about or be like consciously trying to like add context around or like words. But I think that's one of those things where that's going to be a constant kind of thing that I think these companies are mostly going to have to worry about, of like, how are we including voices across a wide spectrum, and how are we including, training data that is very diverse. And that's something that I think is less going to be on us as the consumers and the users of the tools, and more on them to continue to improve that. I think they have been doing a lot on that front. I think in terms of the main kind of problem I see right now is a lot of companies that are just like jumping into using AI and they're like, it's terrible, it doesn't work, I hate it. And they wouldn't have done that same thing when they rolled out a CRM or they rolled out like some automation tool or anything. They treat it so differently that I feel like then they're just like, doesn't work,
true.
like we're over it. And it's, again, you have to be strategic. So I think of the strategy first. There's so much pressure from the C-suite to just do AI, what we don't know. But I think managers can do a service to their team to say, okay, what are we trying to accomplish? It's not even which tools can accomplish this, but like, how do we have to automate this? How do we, like, how would it help the operations for our team? And then start there. And then again, like I said, go more in terms of the building the foundation for those tools. I haven't mentioned a couple of the kind of, they call them wrappers of ChatGPT, but there's Jasper and there's Copy.ai. And those tools are more like custom interfaces for it. So I think those are like a good place to maybe go if you don't want to do too much of your own building. But even so, you have to give Jasper or Copy AI context. You have to give it some information about your personas, your audience, all that kind of stuff. So no matter what tool you're using, you have to start with the data that you need to feed it. You have to start with the strategy for what you're trying to accomplish. You can build workflows in either of those tools also, which is pretty powerful. It's like anything else. If you were doing workflow in HubSpot or anything like that, still be strategic versus just, oh, I don't know, I push a button, it's magic. So I think that's the main thing I'd say is that's build the right way instead of just like starting and shooting from the hip.
Yeah, so smart. I think we all, human nature, right? We want the easy button. We want to be like, okay, write us this 1,000 word blog post or analyze our entire CRM and tell us XYZ. And we just want to be able to put in a link and hit go. And it doesn't quite work that way. So we have to start with the strategy, build those foundations that you're talking about and have the right data, provide the right data, and then work our way up to these bigger asks. But we have to feed it the right things.
Oh, no, I was just going to say also people can create like a library of snippets or like kind of things to reuse. So I think a lot of times people think and then also within ChatGPT, there's custom instructions, which you can basically have as like a thing that it's always using as like background, which is really helpful. Custom instructions is like a little setting in ChatGPT, but that way you don't have to keep repeating yourself and say, I work for this kind of company. I'm this kind of role. I'm trying to serve our audience, but you can just like basically keep it in there as custom instructions so that it's always remembering that. The fascinating thing is that now there's even what's called a memory. It's not that it's using it to train the model, but let's say like the other day I'm going on a trip, like I like an itinerary, and it added that to the memory for me. So that basically like later, if I ask it other questions, it's going to know I went on a trip and it's going to say, okay, here's some stuff you might want to do there or that kind of thing. It's getting better at really understanding those things or being able to preset that. So there's some ways to shortcut so you don't have to say that, give it the foundation every single time.
Yeah. Do you recommend then if we're using ChatGPT, for instance, that if we have a personal one that we're the paid personal or free, maybe that doesn't matter or does, do we, for our company or for each of the companies we're working with, should we create a separate one so that it starts to build who you are and who your audience is for each account?
Yeah, I think because what's funny is once I look something up for my mom and then it's like adding to your memory, I'm like, this is not related to me. I was like, even that was a funny example of like, where you really have to keep it siloed because I think otherwise it'll like mix those things together. So it is definitely good, but they now have a team plan, which is even better because you can develop like custom GPTs and you can do that where you're actually like having an overall manager for those instances and for those seats. And then that way you can build out more of an infrastructure for the team and then also set certain restrictions and stuff, I'm sure. But it's a better way for you to be able to have like it under the company account. And that way it's like learning collectively within those instances.
Very cool. Alessandra, I know we're at time for us, but a couple more things. Number one, if anybody wants to learn more, there's so much more. It's basically infinite, the amount we need to learn and continue to learn about AI. Where can they follow you or absorb any more information that you can share with us?
Yeah, you can visit my website, humansplusai.co, and it's .co, not .com. I didn't get to nav that one, but I'm super active on LinkedIn, and so just look me up, Alessandra Colaci on LinkedIn. I would love to have a conversation. I love to just talk about this stuff. Obviously, I'm super passionate about it, so if anyone wants to just ask questions, connect with me on there. But yeah, I think it's a very new kind of thing, so would love to have conversations with anyone.
Love it. Very cool. And one last question, bringing this full circle. If you could talk to young Alessandra today, just starting out on her B2C, B2B, multifaceted generalist journey, and then into AI, what would you tell her going back in time to the very start of your career?
I think especially as a woman, I would say just step into your power. know that more than you think. Because a lot of times we have to deal with different things as women that I think sometimes make us feel less than. And so I think I would just be like, more than you think you do, but also be a learner. Like I've always been like, just trying to learn and also learn out loud, teach others as I'm learning, which I think helps show that you're a leader in the space, but also it helps everyone and helps build a community around that. And that's served me well. Like honestly, being like, I never stop learning. And I think that's advice I'd give my younger self. Thankfully, I took that advice and I have been a learner. But I think that's really important has been really important to my career to just constantly be experimenting, trying new things. Like I joke that I'll push all the buttons and see what does what. And I think that's really from the very early stage has been very good because I'm like, well, if I break something, it's fine. I can fix it. And I think like everything is solvable. Everything is figure outable. And so I think just like experiment because you'll be able to figure it out.
Yes. I love the step into your power, by the way, words I needed to hear today. So really good reminder for me personally, but that's great. And then diving into that, making sure you keep learning, like it's stepping into your power. It is almost making sure you're human. You are going to mess up and that's okay. We have to keep learning. All of us are just figuring it out day by day. Things change every day in AI and marketing and beyond. So love that. Really good reminders.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you said, everything is solvable. Cool. So even when we make mistakes, like I actually encourage my team to make mistakes. I think it's one of those things where we need to be comfortable with that. And a lot of times we've been like conditioned to not make mistakes. But if you're not making mistakes, you're probably not like doing something that's going to actually grow and to get good results. A lot of the times when we look at historically, the people who have succeeded are the ones who made mistakes along the way and actually some very large ones and eventually like it worked out. But I think if they hadn't, they wouldn't be the success stories that we know today.
Agreed. I think the next generations have become much more open to failing and understanding that you have to fail, you have to make mistakes to learn. I think that our generations in past, it was very much you have to be perfect, you have to put on fake it till you make it, and you can't make mistakes and don't ask stupid questions. And now it's just a totally different. I'm glad that seems to be the way of the past, at least in the US. Who knows? Globally, I'm sure it varies. But
yeah, it's a good trend. I'm glad that it's like changing.
Yeah. So cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Alessandra, and for staying a little over. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing really tactical ways that we can get into AI and use it today. I'm sure you'll get some DMs with some follow-up questions.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Definitely reach out to Alessandra on LinkedIn and her website. And if you like the show, please share with a friend, share on social, and review the show helps us get in front of more people. So thanks, everyone. See you next time.